Okay, do you want to start or should I go?
I know you're recording.
Damn it.
Just start the podcast.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the World Wonders podcast. I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda, and we're your hosts.
And I failed in my attempt to get some authentic pre-podcast banter. To catch Amanda in her natural habitat.
What are we talking about today?
So we're going to try to hash out a bit of the idea of, is travel purposeless? Kind of, because you can see a lot of stuff like memes on the internet, like fancy quote photos about travel is life, something like that. Insert fancy beach picture behind it.
Yeah, I actually really love those quotes.
But I don't know. I kind of feel like so when we were in Chile at one point, we met an older gentleman who had traveled like virtually everywhere. Like his life had just been about traveling places.
Yeah, he'd been to like 100 countries, over 100 countries.
Yeah, I think like well over 100 countries.
I think he was just over, but yeah.
And it was one of those social interactions where you'd say, oh, like, I don't know, elaborate. Like, oh, what are you doing for dinner? He's like, oh, I remember when I was in Botswana and I had dinner with the local tribesmen. Or like, you know, we're out on by like a lake, and he's like, oh, this reminds me of that lake in Tajikistan that I visited.
Tajikistan?
I made that country up.
Can I go there?
No. But just the idea of like, can traveling as a lifestyle, so I guess it's the difference between thinking about traveling as the means to an end, like, you know, traveling can have positive effects on you that help you enjoy your life more afterwards, and like maybe you continue to travel. I guess that's kind of thinking of it as like something separate than life versus, you know, all you're doing is traveling and then you kind of stop in various locations to make a bit of money to continue traveling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, meeting that guy was kind of an interesting experience because, as I kind of hinted towards or said before, I really love those like travel quotes, and I'm a really firm believer in traveling. Like, it's almost
like, you believe it exists?
No, sorry. I do believe it exists. It does exist. But so if I'm talking to a friend and they're like complaining about their job a lot, and they're like, oh, you know, like I come home and like my roommate's always like in their bedroom with their boyfriend, and like I'm lonely and I hate my job, like automatically I'm like, you need to go traveling.
Your roommates, like they hate their boyfriend?
What? No, so like I'm just using an example. So somebody roommate. No, not my roommate.
Okay. Like
other people. I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about other people. So I'm talking to a friend, and my friend is like, oh, I hate my job. I hate my life. I never see my roommate. She's always with her boyfriend. He's always with his girlfriend. Like, all I ever do is work, and then I go to the bar on Fridays, and I like blah, 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 blah. Like, you know, if somebody's talking to me or they're like, oh, I'm really struggling with my parents, or like my relationship with my siblings, not where I want it to be, or, you know, I'm really struggling with my group of friends right now. Anytime somebody's talking to me about struggling, it's almost like I stop listening and I'm like, I can solve your problem. You just need to go traveling. So it was interesting for me to meet that gentleman in Chile because I was kind of like, ooh, I feel like you're sort of putting this like negative side on travel that I hadn't really thought too much about before. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, it kind of,
it's like, well, it was kind of like a when keeping it real goes wrong moment. Like, because you're kind of saying like it can have positive effects, but it's like about a contrast, right? It's about like a settled life and then having this contrasting experience of traveling.
Yeah, like I think it's really important I think that travel is an amazing way to really discover yourself and discover the world. And it gives
But
you,
so what do you mean by that? Discover yourself.
I think that when, we're all raised in a particular city or town in a particular country, and we're raised by a set of parents, whatever, however that may be. Maybe it's a divorced family, or maybe you have two dads or two moms, but you're raised by parents. So it's like we kind of just attach to these identities and these like concepts and these beliefs that are put on us by our family and our school system and our country. So when you are able to experience something different, I feel like you have the opportunity to grow yourself in a different way, because you can take on different opinions and different perceptions and different beliefs. And you can see how different countries are and how different cultures work.
So when you're at home, you're really influenced by your environment, by the people you're around, by your parents, by your friends. And then when you subtract all those people, you can kind of maybe get a bit more of a sense of what you like, what you think, because you're not flooded with the opinions of others.
Yeah, for sure. That's exactly it. And then I think it's really cool when you can come back to that environment and kind of, bring those things into your group of friends or into your family. But I think with somebody like the person that we met in Chile, sorry for listening, gentlemen. But it's like his entire identity was around traveling. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be that person in 30 years. I don't want to be like having nothing to talk about other than, my friends are all talking about something and I'm like, oh, well, when I was in this place, I did this. It's just kind of annoying.
Yeah. And I think that's something that does happen with, like we talked about it on a couple episodes about how, like, at least when we first, like the first time we went on a long-term trip, it did provide kind of this like a sense of identity that was lacking in being like someone who's been places like, oh, I can say I've been to these cool places, which makes me somehow more of a good person. I don't know. It gives me some sort of sense of identity, something you can hold on to, being like, my friends haven't been these places. I have been these places. So that's good.
Yeah. And I think, I always think about it like the actual board game of life. And it's like you're driving along in your like little car. And then it's like you have this career and it's like, oh, am I making more money than like my friend who's there? Well, I've passed them. And I think you can definitely take that on with travel too. Because it's like, oh, maybe my friends make more money than me, but I've been to like 20 more countries than them. It's a way.
So with your board game, you're saying that it's like a way of perceiving yourself through comparisons with other people.
Yeah, pretty much.
Instead of just perceiving yourself.
Yeah, it's like I don't want, like my life isn't a board game. Like it's not about who can get to the finish line first with the most money and the most babies and the best career. Like that's not what life actually is to me, but it's easy to get caught up in that.
Well, and I think that's like the really prevalent view of the world for a lot of people. And I think that like one of the perfect examples that shows that is how upset people get over inequality, for example. Like if you look at how the average person lives today, like how we live, we're mid-20s, working like service jobs essentially right now, and like live a like pretty good lifestyle and can support that on those wages. And sorry, the thought was, you now in 2015 compared to someone in your same socioeconomic level like 50 years ago are so much better off. Like you can get so much information for free off the internet, so many services, you can order so much cool stuff, the prices of things have dropped, this amazing technology. But at the same time, people who are rich are also way better off. And people are more concerned about how rich people are they're more concerned about being closer to rich people than they are concerned about having a better life themselves,
Yeah, for sure. I
Like
definitely get that.
it's like I'd rather me and my neighbors both be poor so that we're at the same level instead of us both be rich and he's just richer than me.
Yeah.
Because like in Canada, like almost everyone's rich. Not when you compare it to, you know, the richest of the rich people, but like compared to what you need to survive, like you've got amazing things all around you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. I'm not even going to add on to that because you summed that up pretty nicely.
It's based off this idea of you comparing yourself to others to figure out who you are, right?
Yeah.
Like you're a 7 because I can draw some conclusions and rationalizations about how my people I know are 6s. And so I can say, oh, I'm definitely better than them. So that means I have some sense of value.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that in regards to travel, I think that it's easy to get caught up in this, like, you know, just going places. So it's like, okay, stamping my passport. Oh, checking this off. I've seen it. And then that kind of leads back to the question of like, you know, what is the purpose of travel? Is there a purpose behind it? Or is it just another way to sort of get ahead in this game of life?
Okay, so another way to just compare yourself to others and say you're better than people.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, another thought with that is, you know, in a lot of our travels, I think we've experienced people who are traveling and I'm going to use air quotes. Nobody can see me, but air quoting travel. You're supposed to laugh there. That was funny. He's not laughing.
I think they can probably figure that out.
I'm hilarious, okay? But people who they go and they spend their time, you know, they start drinking in the early evening, they get super drunk, they sleep most of the day, and then they do that on repeat. And I've experienced that in multiple different locations that we've traveled to. And I mean, we've partaken in things like running the bowls and full moon parties. So we've definitely had our nights like that, but I don't think I've ever spent weeks on end just doing that. And I think there are people who sort of do that. And that makes me wonder, like, what is the purpose of doing that? Like, why did you travel somewhere to do that? Like, are you getting some sort of growth or development out of that? Or like, what is the purpose of that?
Well, so it's hard to guess at what the purpose other people are finding in their actions, but it's probably something to do with, you know, like freedom, relief. Because like, I know for myself, like I was kind of living that lifestyle in university.
Yeah.
Where like, you know, you just go out and drink. And so traveling can be, like if you don't have many friends around, a great way to meet friends is to drink, because, you know, you may have all this social anxiety, but then that gets wiped away by alcohol.
Mm-hmm. I think too, travel is often a really great way to get away from, you know, kind of like life at home. It's a really good escape. And I feel like if you escape to another country or city, but you still don't really know how to process whatever's like happening with yourself, or you don't really understand it, to just go out and drink is another, I don't want to say really good way, but I mean effective and ineffective long-term way to escape. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that is what like is a lot of people do that. So if you like work 5 days a week and then maybe so when you're not working, you have free time. What you do in your free time is, you know, drink, and like that's what you're do for fun. And then you go traveling, there's no work. So you just do what you do to rebound from work, even though there's no work. So you're just drinking all the time.
Yeah, for sure. So for you, like, do you think you've gotten some really good things out of traveling? Like, what do you think the purpose of travel is for you? Do you think travel is purposeless?
Well, so I just want to go back to, like, you started out by saying that traveling can be this good personal development thing if it's kind of like you take a break from your life
Mm-hmm.
in whatever location you're in and go do that. Leave your surroundings. And then, so it's kind of like this contrast where if you're like, it's kind of, you have this traveling and then you come back to some sort of settled life. And then you maybe go back and forth between that. It's like a yin yang thing versus like if you go out only traveling all the time, then you kind of, I think, loops out on a lot of stuff.
Yeah, well, you don't have the opportunity to bring travel, or what I think the benefits of travel are, back into your real life. And to me, travel isn't, I don't want to just travel constantly until I die. That's not really what I want to do. I think I want to go out and experience the world so that, you know, when I settle down on my day-to-day life, I'm able to bring the things I've learned back into that. Like, to me, that's the purpose of travel.
And I think we should say, like, when you say to you, that's the purpose of travel. Obviously, the purpose of anything is defined by the person doing that thing, right?
I feel like that's like the hidden message of this podcast.
But because like
we can't answer, is travel purposeless for somebody else? I think it's just bringing up these things that people should consider if they're going to travel or they have traveled. Or
no, but it like what you can do with it. So like, you know, you can build a nice bench with a hammer, or you can kill people with a hammer. And the same thing applies to drugs, right? People would say there's like the propaganda campaigns as drugs being bad. Drugs are whatever you bring to them.
Yeah, that's a really
I think
good
the same
point.
thing with traveling. Although I would say traveling, it seems to have quite positive effects on almost everyone who does it.
Yeah. Well, I think it gives you a freedom that you don't really have in your day-to-day life. And I think that just opens like a lot of windows of opportunity for you.
And I think that's one thing that kind of changed in my mind from the first trip we took to like something that changed throughout the second trip we took. So the first time it was kind of like this yin yang thing, right? The idea that, you know, we finished university, we went traveling, and this traveling was this period of relaxation, this period of freedom, before resigning ourselves to go back to get, you know, X job and X company and do the traditional thing of like, you know, working your way up the corporate ladder, because that's what kind of everything I had learned, at least. And then going traveling the second time and really being able to see how unhappy I was doing that, and kind of starting to notice that maybe the things that I liked about traveling didn't have to be about traveling. Like because there's some amazing things about not traveling, like living in one place, and you can really build deeper connections and have relationships that evolve over long periods of time. You can
like a sense of community too. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, like having a community, especially like we live here in Canmore, Alberta, and it's a small town, and you go out to the grocery store and you see people you know. And just living somewhere where you have this possibility of running into someone you know, practically every time you go out somewhere. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's a possibility every time.
Yeah.
Like that's a pretty cool thing to experience.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think when you are traveling, you do miss out on some stuff that you can get at home, and you do get this sense of novelty because you're going to new places every time, you're meeting new people. But I think novelty doesn't really carry as much as the depth. But the idea I'm trying to communicate is that the second time you're traveling, you kind of realize that, so what do I love about traveling? Well, it's this sense of freedom from like really a lot of social expectations.
Freedom from like having to get up in the morning and go to a job that you may or may not want to do.
So I would say that's more control over your own life. Like you decide what you want to do. If anybody knows who James Altucher is, the author, he wrote a book called Choose Yourself. So that's like choosing yourself, right? Like having control over your own life.
I think though, even being in like living in Canmore and working jobs that, you know, we have like way less responsibility, way less stress. It's way more enjoyable. It's still the difference between like I still have to go to work in an hour. And even though I'm going to enjoy myself at work, I still have to go there in an hour. Do you know what I mean? Whereas like when you get up and you're traveling, you're like, what do I want to do today? And you really have endless possibilities.
But so yeah, I'll just finish my thought from before. You have some sort of autonomy and
Is
control
that
of
not
your own
what
life
your thought was?
and some freedom. And then those are things that you can get back at home. It's just harder to take them, right?
Yeah.
And so do you think now you have more of a sense of waking up in the morning and doing what you want to do than you did a year and a half ago?
Yes, 100%. And I have more of a sense of that even from the first time we traveled. And I think, you know, looking back on my journal from the first time we traveled, before we got home, like I set out all these different things, like kind of goals or life guidelines for myself that were really on par with the things I came home with from this last time in South America. It's just, I got really caught up in a whole different world. Like I just didn't apply those things. So I think I knew those things. I just didn't apply them.
Yeah. And because there's this reality of having to support yourself, right? Like it's obvious, but a lot of people kind of like lament the fact that they have to work. But like, you know, in order to survive, you need to either be completely self-sufficient, like making your own food and creating your own living conditions, or if you want to live in a society, you need to be finding people you can contribute value to.
For sure.
And you contribute value, they contribute money, which is just kind of an abstraction of value. And then you can use that money to get the other stuff you need to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to be like providing value for others in order to survive.
Yes, 100%.
But I think like, and when you're traveling, I think that's a lot of people aren't doing that when they're traveling.
I mean, the people are though. Like a lot of people do like work in hostels for a free stay, or a lot of people go and woof.
Yeah, definitely.
And a lot of people do like work away. So they're like working while they're somewhere else. Like lots of people do that. I mean, on the other side of that, lots of people don't.
And I think that the thing I was trying to get at was, I think for me, when we went traveling the first time, I thought the reason I was enjoying traveling because it was something where I didn't have a level of responsibility, right? It was like, oh, I don't have to go to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Like sort of a different thought process around what work is and the idea of providing value to the society in order to get a means to feed yourself and live.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that for sure.
And it's like now we do this podcast and, you know, this podcast hopefully provides value to people. Like we've heard from some people that it has provided value to people. And so that, you know, is that work? Is that not work?
I mean, it's work in terms of the actual definition of work, but it's enjoyable. So
yeah, and it's like,
which is what
I do
work
this because I have fun doing it, and it also provides value to people.
For sure.
So there doesn't need to be a sacrifice there.
Yeah, which is pretty cool. Like I think that's how life should be. So I wanted to ask you, when we were discussing this topic last night, we were sort of talking about, you brought up this idea of, has it been the best use of your money? Like, is there something, you know, that you could have put your money into that would have been a better use in terms of your development? And I just wanted to discuss that a little bit.
Yeah. So what we were talking about was how we both have felt like, as we've talked about on this podcast a bunch, that travel has had, you know, really big positive effects on our lives, or has helped us to create positive changes in our lives. But, you know, it does cost a decent amount of money.
Yeah, like we've spent thousands and thousands of dollars on travel. Realistically, I could have bought a new car with the money I've spent on travel.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say you're better with traveling than with a new car.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, we often get asked, how can you afford to travel? And for me, it's like $5 latte. Like, no, that can buy me a meal in somewhere like Ecuador. Like, I'm not spending money on that. I'm very careful with that. I don't spend too much money on clothing. And, I look at somebody like my brother, for example, who is covered in tattoos, and they're beautiful. It's art on his body, and that's what he's chosen to spend his money on. But, I've chosen to spend that money on travel. And we were just kind of talking about this idea of, not necessarily spending on like clothing or food or material items, but if people were to, have $1,000, are they better going on a trip, or are you better putting that towards some life coaching or some therapy or, some private sessions with a counselor where you can really work through any potential things you might have going on? What's the best use of your money? What's going to give you the most value?
Yeah. And obviously, like, it's just entirely speculation, but so I think there's something big about separating yourself from your like original environment, for sure, and potentially like environments that you've gotten yourself into. So for example, like, I moved to go to university, so that separates me from my original home environment, but then kind of come into that environment not really knowing what I'm about or what I want to be doing with my life, and kind of settle into another group of friends, social circle. And kind of, I feel like you do get a little bit stuck when you're just in the same environment for a long period of time, because you come to have these people who expect you to be the way you've always been. And there's a bunch of social cues and social pressure that push you to be that way.
And we're very habitual creatures. Like, we just do things without really being conscious of them. Like, so if anyone out there is like, oh, I don't act the same way around my friends all the time, just, pay attention to it, because we are very habitual in so many different ways, just as humans.
Sorry, what do you mean by habitual?
Like we, every time we tie our shoes, we probably start with the same shoe that we tie first before the other one. We would probably always brush our teeth on the same side. So it's like we do all these things without really realizing it. We get up in the morning and have this sort of same routine. Like for me, it's like I get up, I go to the bathroom, I put the kettle on. Almost every day. And then, so we do those habitual things, and then we go into this group of friends, and we have these same sort of habitual things on a different level.
Yeah. And I'd say it's like habitual conformity. Like you go to work every day, and you kind of have to, a lot of people, when you go to work, you kind of have to sacrifice a bit of authenticity. Like maybe you can't swear when you want to swear. Maybe you're afraid of your boss, so you like smile when you don't want to do that, and you don't want to say like, oh, I'm really not interested in what you're talking to me about, so I'm just going to go do something else. You kind of just pretend to listen, and then those habits continue into your social life,
for sure.
So yeah, I think if you can getting out of those environments, just leaving, I think that's like a really positive thing, because I think, like, let's say like you recognize that, okay, there's some because I guess we should probably talk about therapy as an option before, because maybe people don't really think about that. I definitely wouldn't say therapy is something, I guess I kind of thought about therapy as something kind of like intense, like you needed to have, issues I have aren't really issues that you would go to therapy for.
It's kind of made out to be like, oh, people with problems go to therapy. But it's like, what's a problem? Like a manager that's causing you stress every single day is a problem that's completely worthy of talking to somebody who's not in the situation and getting another opinion on it.
And yeah, I think people have, in general, so many people have problems.
I think all of us have problems.
Yeah, of course. And so we've both been to therapy. And I think it has, you know, a great source of value for our lives. And I'd say, like, if you, for example, if you get stressed and then you eat to deal with stress, like, you know, that's something you can get help with at therapy. Or maybe you have trouble sleeping because you've got thoughts constantly running in your head. Like, that's like a mental health issue and stuff like that. Like, there's so many issues that, you know, that's not the way you need to be, have to be, or are meant to be.
I feel like, yeah, people, like, even if you're somebody who, you know, skips meals because you have guilt about how much food you eat or guilt about a lack of exercise, like, that's, you know, that's a thing that you could talk to somebody about. I think what we were talking about last night is, you know, Ryan kind of brought up, you know, maybe I would have been better off, like, I as in him, he said this. He said that maybe he would have been better off spending less money on travel and maybe going to more therapy. And I brought up the point of, but, you know, would that have been an option that you would have considered had you not gone out and sort of experienced the world and seen what else was out there and met other people and discovered, you know, something different?
Yeah. And I think that's like a very valid point. Like, I think if you had me and were able to like split test and put one version of me into like therapy and one version of me into traveling, sure, maybe the therapy version might have good results as well. But I think when you're traveling, it kind of gives you the space to be open to new ideas, and to be more introspective. Mm-hmm. Because I think, at least from my experience in living in like kind of a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday world, my time off of work was more about escaping. It was escaping stress and anxiety, just kind of distracting myself. So I was like watching TV programs, reading. Everything was about escaping. So I wasn't really like learning much or like opening myself up to new ideas. Mm-hmm. And like, you know, the idea of improving my mental health was, you know, that was a new idea that I don't know if I would have been open to if I had been traveling more and kind of encountering it there.
Yeah. And I think too, a part of that is like society. I mean, I think society's starting to shift in terms of this, but there has been a very negative stigma around this concept of, you know, poor mental health. Like, I feel like I was very much raised in like you know, people who go to therapy have problems, like there's something wrong with them type thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, even now talking about it, like, I feel a bit nervous to be like, oh, you know, go to therapy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's something we were brought up not really talking about, but I think that almost everyone I know deals with some sort of like quote unquote mental health problem. I don't even like putting it in that category. It's just, as humans, the way we process information, the way our brains work, and how complex we are, we have stuff. Like, we have stuff that just builds up that, you know, it doesn't hurt to just see somebody who's completely doesn't know your friends, doesn't know your family, doesn't know your manager, where you can just say, you know, they said this yesterday and it really upset me. Like, is that okay? Is there something wrong with me? You know, I'm feeling this. And they can, you know, just be that ear to listen to without putting a judgment on you, and you don't have to worry about them telling somebody else type thing. Mm.
So going back to the traveling point.
Bring it back to travel.
Like, traveling can be like really therapeutic if you're getting, I think the thing I'd say is that there's something about getting completely out of your environment.
Completely out of your comfort zone.
Well, and away from all of the kind of like triggers and habitual behaviors that you've developed in the place you're at. Mm-hmm. Like, it's kind of like a drug addict thing, right? Like, you know, drug addicts are significantly more likely to relapse after rehab if they go back to like their exact same environment.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it's the same thing with like, if you want to change your life, you're significantly more likely to relapse if you go back to the exact same environment.
Yeah. I mean, on a different level, for sure.
Or if you stay in the same environment.
Mm-hmm. So I think I mean, I guess to just sum it up, I think that travel can really have a purpose, and travel can really have those positive effects that they sort of, put in these like beautiful travel quote advertisement things. But I think that travel is like anything else. Like if you choose to go on a vacation and you just want to, drink beer and sit on the beach and read a book, like you're probably not going to have much positive development from it. And if that's what you choose, then that's fine. But I think that travel can be a really great thing to help you grow and develop as a person. And it can really have a purpose.
But yeah, and I would say like it's more about like a platform. Like it's an environment in which you can do these things in, or which you can also not.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess it's like anything. It's kind of what you make of it. And I think too, that if you just continue to travel and you're never going back home, I mean, think about that. Like, are you running away from something, or is there something you don't want to face at home? I think that's something important to consider too, because just having your identity just as, oh, I just travel, like, I'm homeless, I'm nomadic, I just live wherever. I think it's important to, think about that as well.
Yeah. Because that's kind of, I guess, kind of what I was trying, or like, I think you saying that kind of makes me think about what I was saying earlier, about how I think it's good to get out of your environment, because I think your environment can be overwhelming. Mm-hmm. I think it's better to just completely change your environment. Not changes and like leave, but like, if you're unhappy in your life because of your relationship, because of your job, because of your social circle, like, quit your job, get new friends, get out of your relationship, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I say traveling's good if you can leave that, and it gives you kind of the strength to come back to that and change that and create the life you want, or go somewhere new and create the life you want.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's not about running away forever from those issues.
Yeah, like for me, I think that the biggest benefits I've gotten from travel, I've really, it's been the most beneficial when I've been able to go home and actually use the things that I've learned in my day-to-day life. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would really agree. And I think that's something that I like, it's the things you can enjoy traveling, I think, are things you can live a life at home and incorporate those things into, like control over your own life, a sense of freedom, really being authentic to what you want to do, mm-hmm. instead of living this fake life of trying to be what other people want you to see, what other people want to see you be.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I've really learned is like, so traveling, it's like you show up in a city and you hate it. It's like, I don't need to be here, I'll just leave. And that's something that I've taken to, living now is, and with work especially, if I get into a job that I don't like, I'm not going to stay there. Like, it's just not going to happen. Like, I'm not going to put myself through that. I don't think that I owe anybody anything. And I don't think that if I hate something, I don't want that on my resume. Like, I'm not going to buy into this idea that I have to work a job for a certain amount of time, because otherwise nobody else is going to hire me. I'm just not going to do that. So that's, it's cool when you can go out and you can travel, and then you can bring the things you've learned back home. And I think that that's the purpose of traveling, personally.
Is to
go out and really learn things and then be able to bring those back home. Mm-hmm. Bring those learnings back home.
Sweet. Anything else to add?
I mean, this is like a sort of obscure philosophical topic, so I think that we could probably go on for ages, but we'll leave it here. If anyone has any questions or comments, or
strongly disagrees. Maybe you think that. So I guess what we're kind of saying is traveling is like, it's a means, not an end.
Yeah.
But maybe you feel like traveling is an end, and that's what it's all about. So we'd love to hear from you and get your contrasting point of view.
Yeah, www.theworldwanders.com. You can find us on Twitter or follow us on Facebook. It's just The World Wanders. And thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.